My name's Becky. I'm an addict. The crowd is rambunctious tonight. I'm going to breathe a little first. Before I forget, I'd like to thank Michelle and the convention committee for asking me to speak this weekend. It was kind of Murphy's Law about me getting here, and anything that could go wrong did go wrong, and I started to feel like, well, maybe I'm just not supposed to go. And so as soon as I kind of let go of it, and then it worked out. So, this has been, I guess the other person that I need to thank is my partner, because this is my 5th weekend out of 6 weeks away from home. And the deal was, well, for once in my life, I said, it's up to you. And he graciously said go. So this weekend's been a real treat for me. I don't know what you guys are going to get, but I know for me that I arrived tired and needing my batteries charged, and that's exactly what I've gotten this weekend. People have been very friendly to me and very warm and loving. Ron's been my guardian angel, and I've had a really nice weekend, so I'd like to say thank you. The other thing I need to say is that kind of what's gone on in Narcotics Anonymous and what's gone on in our society at large about being politically correct really makes me want to act out. And I don't have any other verbiage to use or words to use, and that's not the point. It's just that sometimes I forget the point. And that's what bothers me about being politically correct. One of the things that I love about Narcotics Anonymous is that one addict helping another is without parallel. I was really pleased to see at this convention today the medication and recovery meeting. There were a lot of people there who, obviously that was something that's very tough to talk about in recovery. It's one of those politically charged issues in Narcotics Anonymous. And what I saw was, one more time, one addict helping another was without parallel. I heard it in the meeting, and I saw people share their experience, strength, and hope. And I believe we can do that a lot as long as we're loving and supportive and do what we do best. Narcotics Anonymous and the people in Narcotics Anonymous have loved me and carried me through doing all kinds of things that I'm not particularly proud that I've done in recovery, but I'm really grateful that the judgment and the criticism and the labels were never an issue. So, as much as I believe in the power of our message and as much as I passionately love Narcotics Anonymous, I really hope that we never make anybody feel anything but welcome when they walk through these doors. It's really bothered me lately. It's really important to me, and it reminds me where I came from. There's a lot of paradoxes in this program. We read every meeting. We don't care where you came from, how much or how little you had, what you've done in the past, but only in what you want to do about your problem and how we can help. And then we spend a lot of time talking about all that stuff we don't care about. We have a lot of messages like that. The first thing that I was ever capable of really recognizing that I loved unconditionally, no matter what, was Narcotics Anonymous. And I'm not saying that because that's the sane or rational way to go, but it was the first thing that I was capable, that I knew I felt that about, that there were no conditions. It took me a long time to get that way with people. But I could do it about Narcotics Anonymous as a whole. It was really difficult if I had to deal with somebody one-on-one, but this is where I've learned that, and you guys are who I've learned it from. There's nothing very unique about my story before I got here. Like most things I've done in my life, I did things pretty backwards. When I was 12, almost 13 years old, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I've been tall since I was about 11, so I've always passed for being a lot older than I am. Always ran with older men, and the first drug that I ever remember doing was I stuck a needle in my arm and stayed gone for 3 days and ended up in jail. My using never was sane. It never started out as a good time. It was about getting numb, and it was about getting out there. I have no conscious memory to this day of why I even did that, except I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or the right place at the right time is what I thought. I've never gotten away with it, you know. But it was it for me. It was a love affair from the beginning. You know, it worked. That started a long series, you know, needless to say that I was a baby. You know, I watch people come in the program really young now, and I'm really grateful that recovery is available to people who are that age. I really thought that I was grown up, and now I look at people who are that young, and I know that they're babies. You know, I think the other thing that's difficult for me about talking about what it used to be like is that the only reason I know the things that I know about who I was as a practicing addict is with a lot of years clean. I mean, that's been a process of looking back and kind of uncovering a lot of the stuff that happened to me in my past. I learned at a very early age to be a chameleon and to do whatever it took to blend in and to get the look good down pat. You know, one of the things I did, I went and brushed my teeth and got on my knees before I came in here, and one of the things I always say before I speak is, please save me from the look goods. It's been the thing that has kept me separated from people more than anything else in my using and in my recovery. You know, I went a lot of places that I hope I never go again using drugs that early. I was in trouble with the police from day one, and they didn't know what to do with me. I come from the classic all-American middle-class family. There was nothing that the court system could do to me or with me that they figured off I wasn't better off at home. And I also, that look good saved my ass a lot. That as long as I was polite and as long as I looked okay, they'd say, well, she can't really be an addict. I mean, she just must have gotten herself in trouble and she'll be okay. And I got by on that for a long, long time. You know, one of the things that finally got me clean is that I realized that besides being desperate and being tired is that I felt like a juggler who was trying to keep all the balls in the air at the same time, and I knew that I just didn't have the strength or the energy to do that anymore. And that I wasn't so cute that getting by as a woman was going to work for me anymore. You know, and that I would always get out of trouble and that somebody would always bail me out. And that's one of the things that got me in these rooms. You know, I think like a lot of people that I've found since, I thought I was the only one, but one of the things that happened for me is that when I was about 17 or 18 years old, I cleaned up off needles, and for me, from then on, I knew that I was in trouble where drugs were concerned, or, you know, that drugs were just part of my being, that I could not exist without them. But as long as I didn't stick a needle in my arm, I was okay. And that, to me, was clean. And I really believed that that was as good as it was going to get for me. You know, I had a psychiatrist once when I was about 15 years old tell me that if I would just stop using drugs, I would be okay. And I knew that that wasn't true. I knew that in those short periods of time when I had been forced abstinent, that I was not okay, that there was something seriously wrong with me. I didn't know how close I was to the truth, that for a lot of years drugs were my answer. You know, they were what killed the pain and allowed me to live on the planet. You know, it's funny, there's a lot of things that happened to me in those years that I don't even remember, but there were a couple of things that people said to me that were real hurtful and real damaging, and I have no idea why I gave them so much power. You know, another thing that one of those great court-appointed psychiatrists told my parents is that I was one of those people who was just incapable about caring about anyone or anything. And I carried that belief with me for a lot of years in recovery. that I was just one of those people who was incapable about caring about anyone or anything. And thank God my first sponsor was a woman who told me that that was just bullshit, that I was scared and that I was no more incapable than anybody else, but I had to learn how, and I'd never learned how. You know, I have a lot of respect for the disease of addiction. I have a lot of respect for the disease, for its power when we're using. And over the years that I've been clean, I've gained a lot of respect for the power of this disease in recovery. It's a destroyer. It takes everything that's valuable and life-giving and destroys it. You know, and the only thing that I've found that's more powerful than that is the love that I've found here. You know, I've wondered more than once, people talk about the spiritual part of the program. I don't know what part that is. That my recovery has been basically real simple. It's been about me learning how to get unstuck. Learning how to love you and to let you love me. Learning how to love a power that I have limited understanding of, and to allow that power to love me, and learning how to love myself. And it's been that simple. And all the struggles and all the battles and everything that I've gone through in the years that I've been here, and I imagine the struggles that I will go through in the years to come, are really about that issue. That all the things that I've worked on since I got here, from putting down the drugs to all the walls that I've run my head into clean, have been, well, I call them defenses of character instead of defects of character, have been those things that I used to protect myself. And I never knew that I was so afraid. You know, it was really hard for me to admit. You know, I think every dope fiend thinks they're tough in some way or another. I don't know where we get that delusion, but it is part of our denial system. And I really thought that I was tough. I had no idea that I was scared to death. And that I get scared today. I get terrified. You know, the miracle for me is that I don't live my life based on that fear anymore, but I still run up against that block, that it's still that process of learning how to receive that love for me from a power greater than myself, and how to give it away and how to receive it. And that sounds trite and that sounds corny to me, but it's the truth. It's what's been my experience, strength, and hope. You know, this program amazes me. Recovery is available to more people today than it's ever been. When I first, you know, in all those years that I was using, nobody ever talked about doing anything. I mean, the only thing they did with drug addicts were they locked you up. You were unredeemable, not worth the trouble, and they didn't know what to do with us. And thank God that's not true anymore. But one of the things that amazes me about this program is how much it's grown. You know, I came to Albuquerque years ago. I'm not even sure how many years ago it was, and we came in for a service meeting, and we went to a Western States Convention Committee meeting, and it was a small handful of people. Who are you pointing at? That one? It was a small handful of people putting together a convention, and it's happened and happened and happened. You know, when I get unsure about myself and about my own recovery, one of the things that I'm really grateful for is that when I first got clean, that Narcotics Anonymous was that small. Because the availability, you know, I got clean in a place that's a lot like Albuquerque. I got clean in Reno, Nevada. And it's about the same size, it's about the same weather, it's really similar. This weekend's made me homesick for that. The lack of availability of Narcotics Anonymous has meant, for once in my life, I have never taken this program for granted. I have never believed that that it would just always be there. And I've taken everything in my life for granted, but NA is one of those things that I didn't. And I really believe it was only because I got clean in a small, struggling community. I don't know what it would have been like for me if I'd gotten clean someplace like California, where there's lots of people with lots of time. But the God of my understanding gives me exactly what I need. In the 12 and a half years that I used before I got clean, I don't know if anybody's like I am, but I always try to mentally calculate how old somebody is, how long they've been clean, how old they were when they started using, when they stopped using, all that stuff. I was 12 when I started using. I was 25 when I stopped. I'm 38 today. I had 13 years clean, April 27th. And I am proud of that. It's another one of those paradoxes for me about recovery, is that in lots of ways my recovery has been absolutely none of my business. It's been a gift. It's been laid out in front of me, and all I had to do was take advantage of it. And on the other side, I've never worked so hard for anything in my life. I think part of that's just because I get in my own way, but it's been the only thing I've ever done for 13 years. I've never done anything for this long, and I'm proud of that, and it's kept me here in those moments of insanity when my recovery wasn't valuable to me. I wasn't willing to give up my time. I don't recommend that to anybody, but if that's what keeps you here for 5 minutes until that moment of clarity comes back, that's okay. When I first came into Narcotics Anonymous, I was married to a man who was much older than I was. He was one of those things that I had used to change my life, to not be a street dope fiend. I married a man who was a lot older than I was, who I thought did no drugs. Now we all know that chances are, which it was, I married a man who drank his drugs. And I married a raving alcoholic. It was an abusive and violent and insane marriage. The only thing that's a little more insane than that is I married him using and clean. Both of us were clean. My sponsor calls me the step 2 girl. But when we got divorced, we traveled all over the world. We had a great time for a lot of years, or we had great opportunities. I wish I had been present. I've gone back to some of those places. I lived in Southeast Asia and Singapore for 2 years, and I went back there on my 5th recovery birthday, and it was like, I wish I remembered this. It was all a haze. I've gone back to lots of places that I traveled when I was using, and it's like, well, I know I was here, and that's about it. It's really sad to me that I defended my right to be that removed from life for that long. When we got divorced the first time, the day we went to divorce court, he hit his bottom and reached out for help. And he went to a treatment center and stopped drinking and started coming up to Tahoe to save me. The problem is that he was still doing pills and still doing cocaine and was still the same raving asshole that he'd been when he was drinking. Nothing had changed, except he didn't drink and he didn't black out and he didn't get DUIs. And I was not impressed because, like most addicts, I had learned how to substance shuffle. That's how I had controlled my using for years. So because you could put down one drug and pick up another was like, well, so who can't? So it meant nothing to me. About 6 months later, he came to see me, and I'd been on a 3-day runner, and I was wiped out and hungover and feeling bad, and I'm sure smelling and looking and sounding wonderful. I have a lot of respect for people who can hang in there and deal with people in their lives who are still using. I have no idea why he put up with me for all that time. But even though I was so loaded, I knew there was something that was different about him. And I couldn't figure out what it was. Well, he had finally run into somebody who had told him that the object was total abstinence. And he was different. And even I could tell he was different. And it got my attention. It was a while after that before I was willing to even think that it might be for me. And I came in here for all the wrong reasons. One of the things that happened is he decided that he and my parents had been my biggest enablers, which was true. So he called them and told them that they should never rescue me again. So honestly, one of the reasons I got clean is because all of my enablers expected me to. And I really thought that I would come here and get my stuff together and be able to use again. So I came here for all the wrong reasons. One of the things I missed tonight was we didn't do the countdown before the meeting, so, I'm sure that there's people who are new here. And all I can say is no matter why you're here, no matter what your reason is, there's no bad reason to be here. I heard a lot. I got 13th stepped into this program. I don't recommend it, but that's the truth. And I came here only to get people off my back so they would bail me out of trouble one more time. The miracle is not that. I'm sure I could not have stayed clean for all those reasons, but this program is bigger than our denial. And if you keep coming back, I've seen a lot of people hang in here for a lot longer than I did, not able to stay clean, and they get it. And someday it happens. And the only thing that I know that is if you quit, you're done. That's it. But in spite of all those bad reasons, I stayed clean. I moved back to Colorado, and I went back there to do all the things that I thought everybody wanted me to do. I went back to be the wife I had never been. I went back to be the son my father never had. I went back to make up to everybody. He still thinks I'm the son he never had. Boy, that's a whole nother story. Everything I've ever cut loose in this program I've gotten back, but not until I cut it loose. There's some karmic law for me in that I'm such a controller and I hold on to things so tight that until I cut them loose, I never get them. I have a really kind of wacky but wonderful relationship with my blood family today. But I had given up. I had long since given up. And it was years. I remember on my 4th recovery birthday, my father and I were out on the front lawn screaming at each other, saying horrible, hurtful things. And again, I don't say that because I'm proud of it, but because there's a lot of things in this program that if you just let it be, for me, if I would just let it be and let go of it because I didn't know how to do it any better than I was doing it, then it came back to me later when it was right. And it's one of those relationships that's been restored for me, and I'm really grateful. It's no surprise to me that I didn't stay clean when I first got here with all those reasons, but there was something that happened to me that my using was never the same. It never worked again for me. It hadn't worked for a long time, but I never knew I had a choice. And one of the things that happened the last time I used, I learned more in that 24 hours than I think I have in any other 24-hour period. I came back in here willing, absolutely terrified, not believing that what you had I could have, but willing to do absolutely anything to try, because it felt so miserable to be told and to believe some of the things I heard around here and to be loaded at the same time. It was kind of like Richard was talking about last night. My body was loaded and I kept doing more drugs because it felt worse to come down than to stay high, but this never shut up. And when I came back in, I still didn't know if I wanted to be clean because I didn't really know what that meant, and I was terrified that if I wanted it, I couldn't have it anyway. I still believe that. That's been one of those things that gets in my way over and over. But I came back in willing to do anything. There's lots of times today when I say a simple prayer to have that kind of willingness, because I wouldn't let anything get in my way. It was at least 60 miles for me to get to a meeting. I didn't care. There was nothing that was more important to me than trying to learn to not use one day at a time. And it's amazing what can happen in your life when you have that kind of willingness. I have to work hard for that kind of willingness today. I really have to work at it. Not the willingness to stay clean, but the willingness to practice our steps to the best of my ability. to really be open to whatever is God's will for me today, to be absolutely willing to not let my wants and desires and needs and issues get in the way. That's really difficult. Where I got clean, it was the boys' club, and it stayed that way for me for a long time in recovery. It was me and the boys. I got kind of used to it. It had been like that when I was using, and I kind of got used to it when I got clean. So I always felt different. There was always that little piece of me that felt a little bit different. And I met this woman. My first sponsor had 10 years more than I did. She was probably the craziest woman I had ever met in recovery. I think she's still the craziest woman I've ever met in recovery. And she's this wonderful, zany character who was perfect for me. And she was one of those angels in my life. And for her 10th birthday, she decided that she was going to conquer her own fear of heights and jump out of an airplane with a parachute. She said often that she also had forgotten that we had a 6th and 7th step that could help those things. And she hit the ground going about 60 miles an hour. And she broke her back in 13 places, and she smashed everything on one side of her body. She's fine. I mean, all the horror stories that would go with that, they told her she would never, first she wouldn't live, then she would never walk, then she would never sit, and none of that happened. I wish I'd taken one lesson from her. She said that was the only way God knew to slow her down. And she didn't believe. I'm still trying to learn that one. She didn't believe that God had thrown her out of that airplane, but she really believed He used the time to get her attention. So when I had gone to all the meetings that I could go to, and I had done the look good as long as I could, none of the men where I lived would sponsor me. It's because they were smart. And because their wives wouldn't let them. I was so angry about that for so long, and today I'm really glad they said no. So I asked a woman who lived 1,000 miles away from me to be my sponsor. I begged this woman who lived 1,000 miles away from me to be my sponsor, and I don't even think I asked her to be my sponsor. I just said, please help me. And that was the beginning of the first honest relationship I've ever had in my life. I'm glad that there's been many more since then, and it was a beginning. But one of the things that happened after she bailed out of that airplane is that she was flat on her back for almost 2 years. So I had her undivided attention on the telephone. I almost feel guilty sometimes. I really have gotten exactly what I need, and I still get exactly what I need. God's been very gentle with me in lots of ways. And so I had like 3 hours of time with this woman every day. And it was perfect. It was exactly what I needed. She was, as is my current sponsor, adamant about the steps. She's the one who convinced me that there is another promise in this program, and that's our 12th step. That it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. One of the things that threw me, and still throws me sometimes, I was terrified that spiritual awakening that everybody else talked about couldn't happen for me. I really did not believe it was for me. I was a recovering, I'd gone to girls' schools, I'd been around the nuns, and everything I knew about a God that I didn't understand, I didn't want anything to do with. And she promised me that if I would work the steps, I would have a spiritual awakening. And she was right. And that's never failed me, and it happens over and over and over again. She held my hand, she walked me through it, and lo and behold, I stayed clean. I remember I called her once and said, I finally finished my 4-step. I had every 4-step guide known to mankind. That was another reason I needed a sponsor. She made it real simple for me. She told me exactly what to write. It was long before we had that ungodly, complicated 4-step guide we have now. That's not very nice, is it? You know, and here's this woman who has coddled me, babied me, listened to me whine and God knows what on the phone for hours a day. And I called her and said, you know, I finally finished my 4th step and I will fly to Reno when I have the time and money and do my 5th step. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I'll fly when I can. I can't afford it right now. I will when I can. And she said, can you afford not to? And hung up on me. You know, I've only had 2 sponsors in all the time I've been clean, and I'm really grateful for that. It has been absolutely through no effort of my own. But one of the things that I've had, I'm not sure I know what tough love is, but one of the things that I've been graced with is 2 women in my life who have been brutally honest with me and made me feel loved and cared for and not judged or criticized, but they never cut me any slack. This woman that I asked, who's my sponsor now, has been my sponsor for 6 or 7 years. One of the reasons I asked her is because I knew that she didn't particularly like me. That those people who will care enough to tell me the truth become rarer and rarer in my life the longer I stay clean. And when my ass fell off 6 or 7 years ago, I knew that that's exactly what I needed. And it was the same then. I flew to Reno that afternoon. It was funny how I found the money. You know, and that started a process of learning how to tell the truth. One of the things that had terrified me is that my whole first year clean had been a sham. It had been about doing whatever I thought you wanted me to do. It had been about being in a marriage that I was miserably unhappy in. It was about being that son my father never had, and I don't want to be a boy. And I knew that if I ever said it out loud and really looked at the truth, that some things would have to change in my life, and I didn't want to have to do that. I didn't want to have to take the responsibility to change. Finally, with the same motivator I usually have, pain drove me to it. I could no longer continue doing the things I was doing, and I moved to Reno. I went back and packed my stuff and left after I did my 5th step. You know, in those 12 years plus since, there's been so much that's happened to me that it's always difficult for me to know or how to put into words really what that process has meant to me. Those steps have saved my life over and over and over again. I'm one of those people who came into the program who had never legally worked. I had no idea how to take care of myself. I had no idea how not to be taken care of by a man. I had no idea what being, now this is probably a bad word, what being a woman or being a lady was about. None. But I've learned all those things here. I learned all the things, it says we're not an employment agency, all the things it says Narcotics Anonymous is not. I've learned all those things here. I learned how to apply for a job, go to work, get a job, ask for help, balance my checkbook, tell the truth. All those basic life skills, I grew up here. Because I stopped growing up a long time ago, and I didn't have any of those basic skills. And it's really embarrassing to be 6'1" and not to know how to open a checking account. To say, you know, yes, I've traveled around the world, but I have no idea how to walk in and ask somebody to give me a job because I have no skills. And those things I've learned here. And people have taken the time and the effort and loved me through them. You know, there's no way to describe how much my life has changed in the years since I walked in the door. My best defense when I came here was my mouth. I was a smart ass. It was one of the things that kept people away. And I was a very bitter, angry woman, or little girl, whichever the case was. I don't feel that way today. You know, there's no doubt in my mind, down to the bottom of my toes, that I know today that I am capable of loving another human being, unconditionally, for no reason and no payback. That's probably the thing I value most in my life today. You know, I spent my first 5 years clean trying to become socially acceptable. And I became very socially acceptable and very crazy. There's been a lot of miracles in my life. When I first went and looked for a job, I went to work as a temp for a brokerage agency. I don't have a high school degree, let alone a college degree. And within a year, I was a stockbroker and was their operations manager and had 100 employees. There's literally no way to get from here to there. And one of the things that happened because that dropped in my lap is I knew that I didn't deserve it, so I had to earn it. So my whole life became, I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I thought that's what being a productive, responsible member of society meant. And I spent the next many years putting all my time and energy into that. You know, I've heard a couple of conversations or talked to a couple of people here this weekend who seem to have hit the same wall I did, and I don't know that any of us avoid it. I hope some people go through it more gracefully than I did, but a lot of people I know don't. By the time I was 6 years clean, I was as insane as I had been when I was using. I was absolutely crazy and non-functional and couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. And I got a new sponsor, started the steps over again, went to 90 meetings in 90 days and asked for help and got that willingness to do anything all over again. But I found out that social acceptability does not equal recovery, and that was an important part. And yes, it's important, but it's not what it's about. And I think for me, honestly, that was the beginning of realizing that no matter what my journey was, it was about trying to do God's will. And I really don't think that the God of my understanding cares what my job title is or how much money I make. All those things are nice, but they're the icing on the cake, and I thought they were the cake. You know, my wish for anybody in here who's in that spot of, you know, of absolutely feeling like you want to die clean is, I promise you, there's hope. Look around you. There's a lot of people here who cannot have gotten as far in recovery as they have or amounted the time without hitting those same blocks and without having to surrender over and over. That was one of the most painful times in my recovery. I was telling Ron and Steve last night that a guy walked up to me at a meeting and welcomed me as a newcomer, and I was really offended. And I realized it was because I looked and acted like a newcomer. And I'm not saying that to be grim or somber or to say that recovery isn't about lots and lots of freedom, but you know what? Sometimes I feel like I do people a disservice by not saying that, you know, there have been those times in recovery for me when it's been that bad, and it's worked in spite of me, and that it keeps getting better. Doesn't mean it always keeps getting pain-free, but it keeps getting better. You know, my life has changed a lot in the last several years. That job that I thought was it for me, I finally realized that it just wasn't worth the price anymore. And as soon as I got willing for things to be different, something else came along. And, you know, the 10 years that I spent in Reno was like living in a protected little NA nest. It was a gorgeous place to spend all those years. I moved to San Francisco 2.5 years ago, and it was culture shock for me. It was big time culture shock. And it was about being a newcomer all over again. I didn't know anybody when I walked in meetings. Nobody smiled and was glad to see me. And I learned one more time that I get back in this program exactly what I put out. And that if I was lonely, I had to stick out my hand. It'd been a long time since I'd had to do that because I knew a lot of people in recovery. And all those things that I would tell anybody who was new to do, not only I had to practice what I preached, and go to a lot of meetings and stick out my hand and try to become part of another fellowship. I will never underestimate the power of moving fellowships again. It's tough. You know, it's really a difficult thing to do. And I think one of the reasons it was so hard for me is because I thought because I understood it and because I knew it was going to happen, that it would make it easy. And it wasn't. It was really, really tough. It's also been one of the best things I've done for myself. Because it forced me outside of that little mold where I was comfortable. I work for myself now, which is always interesting on payday. Maybe the money's there, maybe it's not. But you know, it was about a dream, and it was about an opportunity presented itself, and I knew that I would be taken care of no matter what. And that the worst thing that could happen is that I'd move back to Reno and have to go back into the same business. And if that was as bad as it got, that it wasn't so bad. It was also an opportunity for the man that I live with to, we went into business together. Now that's really interesting. We went from seeing each other. I worked in the brokerage business early weekdays. He worked in the restaurant business nights and weekends. We saw each other on Sunday nights only. And we moved to San Francisco and saw each other 24 hours a day. Let's see, if I have 13, he's going to have 17. It's a good thing I had 10 years clean and he had 14, or I don't think we would have made it. You know, and I've learned a lot about learning how to have no expectations of another human being. I got put on, for my 6th step for a year, I got put on no expectations of my relationship. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I couldn't believe at 10 years clean that this simple direction that my sponsor asked me to do, I couldn't do. It was so difficult. Because one of the things that's happened for me in recovery is that it's not that the issues have gotten any different. It's not that the solutions have gotten any different. It's that my stuff's gotten a lot more subtle. And those kind of things that have destroyed all my relationships clean were still alive and present in my life. And I had to accept the fact that what my partner does is between him, God, and his sponsor, and is none of my business. You know, that I can't change him, I can't control him, and it only makes me angry when he tries to do it to me. But that was one of those things where I would hit my knees on a daily basis and say, God, I am not acting out, but if you don't change my insides to match my outsides, I'm going to go insane. And as always, if I'm willing to do the footwork, that change always happens. You know, I've gone to, every time I hit tough spots, I run somewhere else, or I have run somewhere else looking for answers. And I have gotten, whether it's spiritual or emotional, I have gotten great information. I've gotten great advice. But I realized, you know, it took me, I was sitting in 2 spiritual meetings outside of Narcotics Anonymous, and the message in both was that the greatest spiritual movement in the 20th century is the 12-step programs. It took me... Only an addict, or at least in my case, only in my addiction could I take things that are intrinsically beautiful and good and use and abuse them. And what I did is used and abused all those places that I ran to because I wanted them to fix me. And it took me sitting in 2 different places and hearing 2 different people say that to me to realize that with a lot of years clean, I wanted somebody to give me the magic key, the magic answer. And what it was, and what both of these people were saying in this meeting was that spiritual beliefs are great. They are what give us life and give it meaning. But it's really difficult to know how to put that into practice in your life. And that the 12 steps give you real and practical tools to allow God in and to get you out of the way. It's one of the things that sent me back with different eyes to Narcotics Anonymous, knowing that I had to come back here and do it. You know, there was no place that was going to fix me or make me okay. There were lots of places that I can get great information. There's a whole world of it out there, and that I can get help, but that there was no other answer for me. And it's been that way over and over. You know, I've wanted it to be, I guess, advanced recovery, different. And it's still just as simple as it ever was. You know, Ron asked me, one of the things I did, we snuck out this morning and went to Santa Fe real quick, and came back for the afternoon meetings, which was a gorgeous trip. But one of the things Ron asked me in the car this morning was, what was the most important thing in my life and Michael didn't count. And it really threw me. It was like, is there the most important thing in my life? Honestly, a relationship with a power greater than myself, as much as I fight and scream and try to resist it, is the most important thing in my life. And the way that that works is through other people. I've tried often to do this thing on my own, and it's never worked. God really works through people, particularly the people in Narcotics Anonymous. And the thing that I'm most grateful for today is the quality of relationships in my life. You know, I've had people in my life, until I got clean, I had never lived any place longer than 2 years. I lived in Reno for 10 years, which was a miracle unto itself, but I have relationships with people that I've had for 13 years, and we've never blown each other off. We've gotten pissed at each other, we've had problems. I mean, in that many years, you will always have disagreements and problems with people, but I have long-term relationships with people in my life, and that's what I'm most grateful for. You know, as much as the men in this program were what were here when I first got here, it's my healing, my teachers, and the place where I hear what I need the most is from other women. And I hope and assume it's the same for men. Now the men are going to applaud. You know, and I've been really, I've been going too fast lately. And one of the things that I've done the last 2 days is pulled out my old battered meditation book that served me well over the years and gotten back into, you know, it's time to quiet down again. Because one of the things I realized in going so fast lately, which has been a lesson that I've had to learn over and over in recovery, is that I lose out. Because what I've lost touch with, or what I don't get as much, is contact with those women in my life. The women that I sponsor, I've sponsored some women for 8 or 9 years. They're fine. They have great support systems. They have peers that they talk to all the time. But I miss out on being a part of their life. And that's one of those things that, you know, it's time for some changes. When I was 10 years clean, I knew I had congenital kidney defects and that my health had always been strange. And right before I moved to San Francisco, Dr. Reno asked me to be tested for an immune deficiency disease called Epstein-Barr, which I had always called the yuppie disease, because only chronic overachievers seem to get it. And I thought it was all in people's head. And one of the things I said was no, that I wouldn't get tested for it because I wasn't willing to do anything about it. And when I moved to San Francisco, I did get tested. Surprise, surprise to nobody but me. I was positive. And it's one of those things that I don't know how much clearer the message could get for me, and has continued to get for me, that I have to slow down. I have to. I mean, now my health just will, it's like somebody just pulls the plug. I just can't go anymore. It was one of the reasons why there was a short, my tickets were messed up and it would have flown me in on Saturday night and out on Sunday morning. I physically can't do it anymore. I don't even have the choice. And that's how specific it's needed to get for me, and I'm still not very good at it. I still rebel against it, and I still struggle with it. You know, one of the great things for me about being in Northern California is it's where I can get absolutely the best help for it. And also, at those times when I wanted to rail at God and feel sorry for myself, I live in a community that is rampant with HIV. What I have is frustrating and debilitating. It is not life-threatening. And I sit in rooms with people every meeting I go to who are struggling with a life-threatening illness and show me great courage and great strength and great hope. And I just can't even really work it up for myself to feel sorry for myself. And it's been exactly what I needed. That those are the people who have told me it would be okay. No. I think I'm done. what I say always seems to be none of my business. It's one of those things where I think that my brain synapses are just fried enough that it doesn't matter how much I think I know what I'm going to say, it never comes out the way I think it's going to. And it seems to be, it's one of the, the first time I ever spoke in front of a large crowd, I came off the stage, and it was one of those flashes of awareness that I knew that God had done for me what I could not do for myself. It's one of those times when I am not capable of standing up here and telling the truth about who I am and about how important this program is to me. I guess my wish for everybody is to keep coming back, and thank you for 12-stepping to me tonight.